Okay, good morning. We are going to start our class today, and we're talking today about third culture kids and depression. I'll just quickly recap the definition of the TCK. We're looking at how we can counsel this unique population of young people, and the definition that we're working from is from David Pollock and Ruth Van Reken, where it describes a third culture kid as a person who's spent significant part of his or her developmental years outside of the parent's culture. Obviously, we've spoken already about the fact that can be in many different contexts, in many different ways. It can have frequent changes and frequent mobility. It can also be immigrants, refugees. It can be military, missionaries, and so on. So we're talking about a large and growing population of young people living outside of their passport country. So from that context, we move into the three realities common in these stories. The commonalities include cycles of transition, giving rise to multiple losses and grief that come out another way. So there's a cycle here going on of loss and grief, which we'll spend a lot of time on today. There's also these changes that are happening at critical stages of life, obviously in the developmental years is part of that definition, and so it interrupts traditional processes for learning cultural balance and belonging. So while every young person might struggle with identity, there's a unique struggle that TCKs go through, and changing cultural worlds that result in broken relationships and difficulty or reluctance in establishing relationships. And we're going to look at a case study today that touches on that. And so relationships and attachment and conflict resolution and all of these things begin to become unique issues for TCKs. The case study I want us to start off with, I'll just go through this, and as you're kind of reflecting and listening to this, be picking up on what factors we need to explore more. So Sophia is 14, she's from Spain, she's a new student in a school context. She comes to a school counselor 6 weeks after school starts. She's unable to go to class, she's tearful. She expresses she's been crying every night for the past 2 weeks. They moved to Dubai for Sophia's dad's job, and they live in a beautiful large villa next to the beach. She's very close with her family, two twin sisters younger than her, doing very well, so she feels as though something is wrong with her. Her mom has also expressed concern, as Sophia is usually very bubbly and funny and was very popular in her last school, but now it's coming out that she's spending her lunch breaks hiding in the bathroom. So as you just kind of get an overview of Sophia's case, what are the types of things, the factors, the key factors that you would want to pick out of this and explore, especially in light of third culture kid theories? I'll let you reflect on that, maybe talk to in your groups, and then feedback. Right, so you guys have had some great ideas about factors to consider, and most of these you've already come up with. I'll just go through some key factors that I've written down here. It does matter the frequency of moves. There is a lot of research that just talks about the frequency of moves and the number of losses and the number of time that cycle, they go through that cycle. So we'd want to know a little bit more about Sophia's story of her transitions. The reasons the family moved and their approach to it. Was it a family approach? Was it something that they all decided? Was it something they were told? These kind of give more insight into the transition process itself. Unresolved emotions from the move. We talked about that, of just how she maybe has dealt with some of the process of in the range of emotions that come with moving. Cultural aspects and culture shock. We've got a couple different things to consider here. With one is the Spanish culture. So what is it about the Spanish culture that we need to consider? as well as culture shock in a new place, moving to Dubai, and we'll come back to that, cultural adjustment. Language is an issue, and we don't know the level of language. We don't know what language, how many languages are spoken, what's spoken in the home, and so on. We assume it's Spanish, but there is obviously a language barrier potentially that could be impacting this. Social skills, obviously another academic, other skills that might come up in making it challenging for her to adjust. Adolescent development, so the developmental years, she's 14 years old. What's going on in her, what stage is she as she's going through this? What's important would be the social connections and her building her identity. So those are something that most 14-year-olds are going through, but on top of that, she's going through this transition. And obviously factors of identity, her family life, parents' relationship, divorced, together, any family history, anything like that. And then grief and loss. And we're going to spend most of our time talking about grief and loss today. But as we go through and consider these factors, I'll just touch on the cultural adjustment curve. You may have already seen this, but as you look at this, where would you think, just put in the chat box where you would think that Sophia might be along this curve, if we count these as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Where might she be in her adjustment? Okay. Seeing lots of 2s and 4s. Yeah. So basically, we know that she's in a dip. She's struggling. She's in a dip. Probably came initially, felt like vacation. Everything was new. She's in the honeymoon phase, and not quite sure yet whether she's had any sort of surface adjustment yet. It's only been 6 weeks, so I would say, just from what we know, perhaps it is, she is still at that second stage, but it's possible that she did go through that first dip pretty quickly and made a surface adjustment, and now is confronting deeper personal issues. We don't know how fast, kids will go through this. We don't know everything about her story, so either one of those really could be possibilities in her cultural adjustment curve. But the key, I think, is also just recognizing that this is going on in the backdrop as well. So we've got a lot of things going on in the backdrop, including her developmental stages, the cultural adjustment to a new place. And another area that's going on in the backdrop is the stages of transition cycle. Now, this is something that David Pollock has put together, and you can see some of these same patterns where you start off from involvement, knowing where you fit. Then there's the news of the leaving, so you begin to think away from sort of being mentally present and starting to think about where you will be. You maybe lean away from your friends and begin to separate. And then there's the transition stage where you're kind of already in the new place but not yet fully established. You don't know where you fit. It's a very unsettling time. And you're physically present but not necessarily emotionally. Then you have the entry, or this would be similar to, say, like an acceptance of moving forward to accepting the new place, and also others beginning to accept you and understanding where you fit. And then re-involvement, obviously, is the hope that there would become a sense of comfort of where you fit. Others would know where you fit, and you begin to be mentally present in your current location. So as you look at these stages of transition cycle, this is going on as well. I want to give you a little bit more information on the case study, and then I want you to think back to where maybe in this transition cycle you might find Sophia. So during the first session, you discover that this is Sophia's first move abroad. So there we go back to number of moves. So this is her first one. Gives a little bit of insight. She spent all her life in the same small town in Spain, had the same friends since she was young. Spanish is spoken in the home. While her English is at a fairly good level, she feels she cannot express herself socially. She's in WhatsApp groups at home with her friends in Spain and feels she's missing out. She feels everyone dislikes her in her new school and thinks she is dumb. When she's tried to make friends, something always goes wrong. She's incredibly self-conscious and is often unable to make it through the day. So quickly give me some feedback. Where is Sophia in the stages of transition cycle? Yeah, she is sort of right in the middle of it. She is there, but she's not yet assimilated. She's not yet accepted. So she is physically present, but she is emotionally elsewhere. I want us to take a minute now and just do a little reflection about a time when you have experienced grief of some sort. Perhaps it's when you've lost a loved one, or maybe your family's gone through grief of some sort. And I want you to take a piece of paper out and just jot down some of what that experience was like for you. What emotions did you wrestle with? What kind of support system did you have, or did you wish you had? What went well? What didn't go well? What kinds of things were challenging about that? And even how long did it take you to get through that? Just take a few minutes now and just write down a few thoughts. I just want us to go back into that place of grief for a moment before we go forward. And now that we've finished that, let's take a look at what we know about grief. You should be familiar at this point of the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, depression. I have a grief wheel here. I quite like this idea because we know you can kind of go in and out of different stages at different times, and perhaps that is similar to your experience that you've written down. And so as we look at kind of the backdrop of what's going on with our TCK case study, we are kind of also wanting to understand this idea of grief and loss and how that plays into the TCK experience and the way that we might approach counseling TCKs. You can think about things like, how have you helped clients work through deep grief? How have you walked through that with them? How have you done that yourself? We know everybody experiences it slightly different, but it is a key concept for counseling with TCKs. Duncan Westwood, he identifies through some of his research 8 different types of expatriate grief, grief that is common among people who are globally mobile. And I really just want to talk about and look at the last 2. Now, normal grief and mourning, I thought I would just touch on that briefly just to compare. Normal grief would be what we would say is a reasonable response, a human response to and recovery from loss, which can persist for a period of 3 to 24 months after the loss. So that's a big span of time. We know that this is common when there's death in the family, but loss is much more than death, obviously. And so when we think about grief in terms of loss, this becomes a heightened kind of predominant issue that kids who are moving around are experiencing. And if we don't recognize that, it can often get overlooked as a meaningful part of their depression or depressive symptoms or sadness. So normal grief, we would expect to take this long. Unresolved grief and mourning involves a history of losses that haven't been processed. And this is something that tends to be one of the kind of the top reasons or things that come up with third culture kids, is that there's just an unresolved grief. And why do you feel it might be so common that they have this unresolved grief, losses that haven't been processed? I'll let you feedback a little bit on that. Right, so through your comments and the chats and things, we've identified a few different things that probably fall into one of these categories. We have lack of awareness. Sometimes with third culture kids, it has a sense that everything is okay, and that there's actually not a reason to grieve. There's not an obvious, tangible reason. Perhaps life is good, everything seems okay. There doesn't seem to be kind of an obvious moment where they feel like they should be grieving, and so they often don't identify loss or grief as part of this process. It's just everybody's just trying to move forward. We're trying to get going in our new place and be happy about the things that are going on. Even when you repatriate, there can be some sense of grief and loss over, say, if you've spent a significant time in another place and you come back and everything is strange in your home country. So there's just this lack of awareness because it's not a very obvious grief. There's not a tangible loss. Another thing is lack of time. Now we get on a plane and we literally will go from one place to another, and it's like a quick change where your entire life just completely transitions. And often if that is not dealt with very well from the family or the school or whatever, then you have this situation where there isn't really the time. You hit the ground running, you're going through it, and you're just automatically, the way things work, you're automatically in a new situation and you have to adjust. So the time happens quickly, and there's often not space and safety enough to recognize, become aware of those losses, and also take the time to process them. Lack of permission. This one is interesting, and I've kind of mentioned it. A lot of times this is permission. In particular, this one is like a permission for ourselves to grieve. So you might find that a student comes in and says, well, everything is fine. I don't know why I'm sad. I've got a house on the beach, as Sophia does. I've got, Dubai is really cool. You'll ask them, hey, well, tell me some good things. And there's lots of good things about this new place, or there's lots of benefits that the family has talked about. But it sort of feels like it's not allowed. How could you be sad when you have so much? How could you be sad when you have all these privileges? How could you be sad when you're exploring the world? Almost like there's this no reason for sadness, therefore it's wrong to feel that way. We see that in Sophia's case study where she is saying, something must be wrong with me because I am feeling this way and I don't have a reason. And lack of comfort is more like the people around you not really wanting to comfort you, almost for the same reason, almost like an extension of that lack of permission personally. I've seen a lot of cases where parents just want to sort of say, don't be sad, this is great, this school is going to be great, you're going to love this place, don't worry, you'll just make friends in no time. And there's almost a sweeping under the carpet of those emotions and a feeling that they just need to pass through very quickly into the next stage, that they don't want to see their kids crying or upset about these things because there's guilt associated with that personally. So there's this kind of very sometimes a well-meaning but ineffective way of helping our children, especially, go through this grief, because we sort of make them feel like they don't need to, they shouldn't feel this way. So very interesting things to think about in terms of why unresolved grief comes to the forefront when it comes to counseling TCKs. If we continue just one more sort of section of this case study, Sophia comes in again. She's missing class again. She's crying. She's wanting to call mom and go home. It's becoming worse and worse. You contact mom. She's getting frustrated by Sophia's poor attitude. Mom lectures Sophia a lot about being more positive about the great life they have in Dubai. She's taken away her phone so that she can't connect with friends in Spain. Mom's thinking that that's slowing her process by continuing to know what she's missing there. So she's hoping that will help her settle in. You discover that the move was unexpected and quick. The kids were not given much time to say goodbye. So there's a lack of closure, a lack of, again, this time-related thing. And then Sophia continues to feel that she is the problem and something's wrong with her because she has no real reason to be sad. So as you look through this new information and we go back to these reasons, I'm going to break you guys up into groups, and I want you just to think about how you might address these kinds of unresolved grief factors. And so each group will have one: lack of awareness, lack of time, lack of permission, and lack of comfort. And I just want you to process Sophia's case and just think about how you might explain to her some of these things that she's going through, and then what you might do in response in order to help her process those hidden losses. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And we'll feedback. And great job, that was amazing. You guys have come up with some really amazing ideas with that. You've also, I think, understood and been able to pull out from the story all those various elements and reasons for the unresolved grief. As we look back at our grief reflection, a question is how and we've kind of talked about this through what you've said, but there is this idea between visible loss and invisible loss. And again, going back to maybe your reflection, if that was a visible loss, if that was the loss of a family member, a death of some sort, or which we commonly associate, that's a very tangible, visible concept of grief. But these invisible losses are a little trickier. And you know, I'd love feedback on how do you find it different to deal with invisible losses? What are some ways that is more complicated, and how might you approach sort of these invisible or hidden losses? Wait for some feedback on that. And it's good feedback. It's really important, I think, that we remember that these losses are there, even though it may seem like everything is okay. And without the understanding of the TCK theory and kind of what is going on underneath all of this, and the way that mobility creates this sense of loss, we can miss a lot, and we can jump to the conclusion that maybe this child is just struggling with depression or whatever it might be, when actually these are very normal feelings, and they're going to need time to process them. So let's look at a few examples. You've done a good job of just coming up with some ideas with this. And so here's a few other examples. You might be able to spend some time, especially if they've traveled a lot, putting pieces of paper down for each country and place that they've been, and then putting the column in of losses and gains, and helping them to identify both the good and the not so great things about every maybe location that they've been. It helps them be able to look at and be okay with the fact that every place has its good side and its not so good side, and hopefully they'll be able to move away from this black and white thinking, or they'll start to feel more permission to see both sides, the good and bad of their present situation, but also their past. Another way is if they're having trouble exploring and understanding those hidden losses, because they may not be aware. You can use the senses and give them maybe sentence starters, or help them think through when I woke up in such and such country, what did I hear? What did I see? What flavors, what tastes, what things were going on? What have I left behind? Even things like pets and caregivers and different things like that, friendships. Helping them to kind of process through their senses and be able to list and understand and become aware of those losses that maybe haven't really come to the surface yet. Doing an exercise of thinking about life before and life after. So what was life like before, and what's it like now? And also looking at both the good and bad of those things. And we tend to sort of glorify the the past, thinking of only the things that we miss, but there were some things that maybe weren't so great. And same here, maybe helping them see, yes, there are downsides, absolutely, and it is hard, but and life is different. But what are some of the gains that can be through that? And just helping them work out that story in a safe place where it's okay to talk about how life is different. Again, going back to the all or nothing thinking, there is a confusion of emotions. I find that when I work through with TCKs, to show them the griefs, the cultural adjustments and the grief cycles and all of this stuff, that there's like a kind of aha moment of, oh, I'm okay. This is normal for me to feel this way. There is a reason. And it can be very liberating to just give them permission to feel a whole range of confusion about what they're going through, and just providing a safe place for that. I like to also have them, actually bring in photographs or show me pictures. This client, Sophia, it's not her real name, but she would show me pictures of her friends and different things that she did, and somehow in just having the permission to talk about her old life, just gave her a sense of being able to process some of that pain of loss. And perhaps you could use artwork, you could use stories. Another thing is letter writing, writing to those friends, writing to parents, writing to process wherever that grief might be hiding, so they can express some of those emotions. I like to use imagery. I put a picture here and I give them permission, on one hand to grieve the loss of what they've left, and to remember the good things and be able to be free to talk about that and even be sad about that. Also laugh about that and remember in positive light, but also at the same time to be planting seeds. So not expecting them to suddenly just jump in and make friends and be absolutely fine, but planting seeds, to be putting a few seeds in here, and eventually, just like these seeds in this picture, that it grows some roots and you begin to see it. You don't see it right away, but you begin to see it after time. You just must keep planting seeds in your current place, even while you're grieving the old place. Imagery like that can help. Rituals and new tradition making. This is a huge one for some people who have lived in one place for a long time. They feel like they've uprooted, there's nothing the same. Having things around the house that are more maybe a picture on the wall, or their certain bed cover, or something that reminds them of home. These become really important things. Rituals, when you move to a different climate and it's no longer snowy at Christmas time, being able to, with a family, discuss how can we make a new tradition instead of trying to remake the old, and it doesn't quite meet it. How can we make a new tradition that serves the purpose here, or keep some of the old traditions and cultural traditions, not throwing everything out with the new culture, but actually making those very symbolic and meaningful even while you're abroad. That becomes very, very important in the identity of a TCK. And the last thing that we might work through especially is just allowing the families to understand how to do that. And the biggest thing I tell parents is just allow them to grieve. Parents feel guilty. They want them to just snap out of it and be the old kid that they used to be. They may be going through their own grief or delaying their grief. But just giving the whole family permission to say it's going to take some time, and let them sit with you and talk through what they miss. Don't try to fix it too quickly. Allow them to process that grief. So if the onset is within, say, 3 months of the move, and it lasts for maybe 6 months, it's probably going to be diagnosed as adjustment disorder, perhaps with anxiety or depressive symptoms. However, there are a lot of other factors that maybe aren't true in Sophia's case, but might be there for others, as we talked about at the beginning, the different factors that might actually lead to stronger diagnosis, say, of clinical depression, or actually with adults, you tend to see that more as well. So it is good to consider what these diagnoses would be, but in light of these unique aspects of transition and third culture kids. So that's our class for today.